If you've ever had to spray paint or have purchased a car that was spray painted and you'd like to get the original clear coat back from underneath that spray paint if it's still good and bring the car out to a shine, I'm going to show you how. Now my car has been spray painted and I've already worked on one of the panels to get all the spray paint off and get the panel back to a good shine. The process isn't too hard, just takes some time, takes some effort, and it takes a good hand. Not everyone can feel for this, but if you have some patience and you have some practice, most everybody can do it with ease. Now this panel I have yet to touch. What you see here is where the polisher was used when I already worked over the vehicle to get it to the shine it's at now. So what you'll need to do a wet sand on a car, which is what we'll be doing today, there's a difference between wet sanding and just sanding. Wet sanding is if you'd like a nice smooth finish on your car without tearing up the clear coat or the base coat. If you're just sanding the car down, you want to use water. So you'll need water, and you can use either a bucket or you can use a good little stream when it comes out. So you want a good little stream out like that. Then you're going to want to get your assorted pack of sandpaper, 1000 grit, 15 to 2500. And you're also going to want to get you a 3000 grit sandpaper pad. Another thing you're going to want to get these sand marks out, which will be in the next video I make, is going to be a buffer slash polisher and some polish paste. That's going to be required to get the sand marks from the 3000 grit paper out and bring your clear coat back to a shine. Now to get started with sanding, I'll set this down and pretty much you're going to want to keep the car wet at all times, and you're going to want to start with the 1000 grit. 1000 grit being the most coarse. They make more coarse grits than that. They make, you know, like 180 grit, 300 grit, 500 grit, 1000 grit, 3000 grit. All of those just make more fine scratches. So once you get the car wet, get your sandpaper good and wet. You don't want to apply much of any pressure at all. Just kind of let the sandpaper float over the car. So you're going to want to work on the sandpaper or the spray painted spots first and get them worked down till you start to see clear coat. And as soon as you start to see clear coat, move on. Do not continue sanding in the same spot as soon as you begin to see clear coat. And you'll see it through the water, because you'll see the color and consistency of the paint change from the wet spray paint to the clear shiny coat underneath, as well as you'll begin to feel the sandpaper change in how it drags across the paint and resists your motions. Now, I'm no professional. I know that you're supposed to have a cross-hatch pattern at 45 degrees. However, with the motions I'm working with here, I'm kind of limited, and I don't really want to work into too much of the trim or the clear coat around me. So I'm staying in one area, using light pressure to work this spray paint off of this panel. Now, being as I don't know how thick this spray paint is, I'm using a lot of water and 1,000 grit to start with. And you can start to see I'm breaking through the sand or the spray paint now to the clear coat. If I knew how thick this was, the paint itself, I could work with a more coarse grit or work without water to knock it down quickly and get it down to where it's starting to show through. However, right now that's not the case. Once I get accustomed to how thick this paint is, I will work with either no water to work it down faster, or I will work with a lower grit, such as an 800 grit. And you can see I'm working through the paint now, and I'm starting to get through the clear coat. I want to move on instantly. I don't want to continue to concentrate on those areas anymore. I want to make them as consistent with this fade as possible, so that way I can work it all out as one piece. Now I'm moving on to another part of the panel. And you can see I'm busting through all the spray paint now to the original clear coat. Like I said, you can only do this if your clear coat isn't chipped. And you can see that if you look at the spray paint and see missing chunks. So, with the clear coat being in decent enough shape to work with, I know I'm able to wet sand down the spray paint and get it off this car. Now you'll notice this trim was shiny in the beginning of the video because it's already been replaced, but you can see where the spray paint is still at on the original part of the trim of the car, which we'll be working on later. But for right now, I'm getting this one spot because it's going to be one of the most consistent and easiest, quickest spots to work on the car, being as there's several spots that have been spray painted. So now I'm breaking through the spray paint. I'm going to want to apply slightly less pressure and start applying more water and start working around the low spots that are already through to the clear until I get the vast majority of this spray paint off this car. While you're sanding, keep in mind to stay away from corners and edges as they're high spots, and they will sand down to not only the clear coat, but even the base coat or the primer as quickly as 2 or 3 swipes, depending on what sand grit you're working with and if you have water or not. So you want to be careful not to hit those spots much at all. Here there's a lot of spray paint, so I'm going to take the water off for a second and start really eating through it. I'm going to wash all that off. Now, as for fading into existing clear coat without spray paint and these low spots, you're going to want to start working in the opposite direction that you have been, sort of that 45-degree crosshatch I said earlier, which is the proper method, but being as limited workspace we're in, I can only do so much. So now you're going to want to work downward, kind of, with the paint to get the fade to work down lower into the spray paint. And like I said, use very, very light pressure and slowly work the fade down the spray paint and down the panel. And you just want to get into the clear coat. As soon as you start to see a change, you want to move on. Otherwise, you'll start to eat into the clear coat and put deep sand scratches in there, and then it's going to be very difficult to work with, as well as you run the risk of burning through your clear and working into your base coat. then things get very ugly. So now I'm working this fade downward. I want to pay attention to the high spots that are still sprayed and linger away from the low spots that are breaking through to clear until I get it all worked down and clear here. Okay, now I'm going to show you where I've been, where I've yet to do. So I've cleaned up this trim piece, sanded it. You can see where I've kind of accidentally worked through the paint just a little too much, because it's a high spot, it's a corner. I was concentrating on this at the time. And you can see where I've sanded all here. See the dull spot. Of course, the bumper's dull. However, this is all sanded dull. You can see all the sand or the spray paint yet to come off. And you can see up here, this is all wet still. You can see all the sand, the spray paint yet to come off. You can see all the sand marks where I've worked. This is all clear coat that it has sand scratches from whenever I was working to get the spray paint off. This is what you gotta watch and make sure you don't cut through, because you want to blend in from here very gently to here where the spray paint was, and then work all this away. So once I get done working all this down, you can see all the corners. I've been meticulous not to burn through any of them yet. Let's hope, besides that one. But I'll show y'all once I get done cutting through all this and these spots, and probably down here has some of it too. I'll cut all that through. I'll show you how this looks, how it's supposed to look, versus obviously the clear, which you see now. And then I'll show you how it's going to look after you do the 1500 grit, which will be a lot quicker and lighter of a sanding process than this here. What the 1500 grit's going to do is it's going to take these heavy sand scratches and turn them into medium sand scratches. They'll become slightly less dull, slightly less apparent, and then we'll work on the 2000 grit, which will do the exact same process. It'll mask all the medium scratches with light medium scratches. Then you take the 3000 grit and you do the same thing. This is why you want to be very careful not to burn through the spray paint at all more than once it's off. As soon as it comes off, you're done, because you're going to be sanding on this clear coat a little bit more once you're done to get it to come out looking like a mirror finish. So back to the point, 1000 grit turns out like this. Then we'll do 1500. I'll show you how that looks. 2000, then 3000, and you'll see how it progresses and how it begins to become a more consistent dull slash shine, like a semi-metallic, or I'm sorry, a semi-matte. And after the 3000 grit process, the vehicle will be ready to buff, at which point the magic happens and things really begin to come out. Okay, now the 1000 grit sanding process has been done, and you can see it's a nice dull, even shine, or well, dull, even look fairly. I got a little bit more sanding down here than up here, but the next stage, 1500 grit sandpaper, will pretty much unify all this and make it more even and ready for the next step of sanding, which will be 2000 grit. Now I've done the 1500 grit sanding. You see it's starting to get more even. Starting to get a slightly more sheen look to it. So next step is 2000, and then 3000. Okay, now I've got the 2000 grit sanding step done. You can see how it's starting to get its shine back, but it's still got that dull look to it. So you could say it's somewhat semi-gloss. So now the next step is going to be 3000 grit sanding. And here you'll really start to see the car change from that dull look to a shine look. But it's still going to retain some dull finish to it until the next video where we polish this panel to a mirror finish. Alrighty, so here's simply sanding with 3000 grit sandpaper. And this is after sanding with 2000 grit sandpaper. You can see how the bumpers actually come to a semi-gloss. The trim molding has come to a semi-gloss, as well as the panel itself is somewhat reflective with a slight haze to it. This is pretty much what you're looking for. Now you can see right there, I might need to work on it just a little bit with the 3000 grit to get it to be more of a dull, consistent shine like this. However, this panel is now ready to polish. So we're gonna get this panel to look from this to this. You'll be able to see from a gray haze to a nice black mirror finish. So thanks for watching my wet sanding video.